Zevi Reinitz, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Yaakov, nice to see you. Great to be with you.
For our listeners who don't yet know you, maybe give us a little bit of background about where you grew up and how you ended up in your career in marketing.
Sure. So the quick version is I was born in the U.S., actually born in Syracuse, grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I came to Israel after high school and went to yeshiva. I attended basically two yeshivas. One of them is better known today as Nativ Aryeh. At the time, it was Hakotel with Rav Bina. And after that, after 2 years in Hakotel and Nativ, I spent 2 years learning in a yeshiva called Derech HaTalmud with Rav Chaim Ilson. After which I met my wife, and we were together as a Kollel family in the Nativ Kollel. And we settled down here in Yerushalayim. I went to Machon Lev for college, the Jerusalem College of Technology, which some of the listeners might know. It's right there next to the Grist campus. And ultimately developed my career as, I guess you'd call it, a product and marketing executive. I've been in the tech industry for the bulk of my career. And currently I'm the head of marketing at a tech company based in Tel Aviv. And I also work with other organizations, nonprofits, universities, and even some government agencies and other small businesses to help them develop their product and marketing and go-to-market strategies. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
And going back to Machon Lev and the outset of your career, did you have any sort of picture as to, we'll talk in a moment about where you ended up and what you're doing today. Did you have any clue or any inkling of what might develop when you were back as a student and a young professional?
I had absolutely no clue. I went in with zero idea of what I wanted to do. I had decided to stay in Israel. With Hashem's help, I met my wife, who had also independently, after seminary, decided to stay in Israel. Everybody thought that we were crazy and that we were never going to find anybody and we weren't going to be able to do anything. So ironically, we were the first to get married of our chevra, and then we just started to figure things out. And I went to Machon Lev because I just thought that was the place that would fit my schedule and kind of fit my value system. It was the place that allowed me to just go to school without all the frills. I wasn't interested in the full university experience. I had a young family that that I was starting. And as I studied, business and technology, I, just found my way, to meeting people and getting opportunities for some entry-level positions and testing the waters. And one thing led to another, and it kind of pushed me towards this kind of tech marketing scene. I think in retrospect, some of the natural tendencies and interests that I have all along, even before Machon Lev, I think that those things played a part in pushing me in the direction that I'm in. But I certainly did not have a clear direction by any means when I started out.
It's very comforting for someone who struggles to answer questions about what my plans are, and I'm sure that's very comforting to hear. So before we get into talking about your writing and your Torah development throughout the years, I wanted to remind you of a conversation that we had, which actually turned out to be one of the sparks that led to this podcast being launched. I asked you about social media and LinkedIn specifically. Someone suggested as a young professional that I should really be on LinkedIn. And I was a little bit confused. I said, look, I don't have fancy lattes in the morning to post pictures of. I don't make a lot of money to post about I don't make any money, so I can't post about that. So why should I be on LinkedIn? And you had a very profound answer, and it actually led to this podcast. Maybe you could share that with us.
Wow. Okay. That's first of all, I'm flattered that conversation took a part in this. I didn't realize that, but I think what you're referring to is the conversation we had about value. And if I recall correctly, what we were talking about at the time is that for a lot of people, social media, for myself included, social media can feel very unnatural because it is often defaults to being all about me, like you were alluding to. It's like, what did I do this morning? I'm so great. I did this. And, not only is it unnatural, but I think also technically from an effectiveness perspective now as a head of marketing and, someone who's responsible to leverage social media in a business sense to be able to promote my company and products and stuff like that. I think what I've realized is that one of the truths of social media is that it will be as effective as you allow yourself, as much as you allow yourself to bring value to the people who are listening. In other words, if all you're focused on is you, then unless you're like some huge celebrity, like LeBron James or something, I mean, then nobody cares about you. Like, who cares about me? Who cares about, like, we're nice, your grandmother might follow you, but really being effective on social media is about, I think, constantly reminding yourself, how can I bring value to the people who are on the other side of the screen? And that value could be in the form of things that I know, things that I can do, things that I can offer, insights that I have, experiences that I have. If that's what drives the social media presence and the content creation, at least for the real folks among us, the people like you and I, who are just trying to do our best and grow and develop relationships and connections personally, professionally, I have found without fail that the more that I focus on what can I do to bring value to those around me and how can I leverage my circumstances, experience to bring you value, the more effective and the more kind of successful that social media venture will be. So I think that that's kind of like a guiding principle for me in a lot of ways. I'm not always successful at it, but to the extent that I can be, I try my best to think not about myself, but to think what the other person can get out of it.
You might not even remember, but you used the phrase, "This is your chance to grab the mic." And we're talking about LinkedIn, but that phrase really stuck in my head, and now here we are on this podcast. So thank you for that. I want to transition to talking about your writing, and this is a very big outlet of yours, and you've produced a lot. So maybe you could tell us about some of the seforim you've put out and the origin story of how that came to be.
Sure. You are correct. My writing is a very important part of what I do. It's very near and dear to me and kind of my experience as a Jew, as a Ben Torah. At the moment, just in terms of numbers, I'm lucky to be able to have published at this point, I think it's 12 seforim of my own, with another 3 on the way, hopefully in the near future. I've edited several more, and I write about topics, ranging from halacha to machshava to sugiyas on Shas and Gemara, analyzing different minhagim, English, Hebrew, Parsha. It's really a range, and it's something that I have found has really grounded me and allowed me to really maintain whatever positive momentum I've been able to gain, as a Ben Torah, as a Bahlabus, post yeshiva. In terms of how it all started, so I guess the short answer is that, in a sense, I was always a writer. I think even from the time I was a kid, my mother told me that that was always my creative outlet of choice. Always writing, creative writing, analyzing. In terms of transitioning that and focusing on Torah output, so I think that really took off when I was in yeshiva, and maybe most specifically when I was in yeshiva at Rav Ilson's yeshiva that I mentioned before. We were encouraged, they had some of the older guys there, of which I was part of them, so we were encouraged to give chaburas once a week. We had these small chaburas, and we had this round robin schedule. My chabura, Rosh Chabura, was somebody by the name of Rav Kalman Levine. Zichron Livracha, he was tragically killed, just parenthetically, was tragically killed in the Har Nof massacre in several years ago in Yerushalayim. So he was the Rosh Chabura, and he, encouraged us to be creative, to think of, ways to frame ideas and kind of develop our creative output in learning at a sophisticated level. And it was something which really showed me that I could do things that I didn't expect that I was able to do. I could develop ideas, I could defend ideas. And kind of then the combination of those two things, kind of my, inherent leaning towards writing and my kind of fascination with this ability to be, engaged in creating ideas and developing ideas in Torah, that's when it started to come together. And when I left yeshiva, I had kind of like a nice collection of writings that I was very proud of. I ended up publishing a sefer that I called Bikuri Eliezer, which was kind of a collection of those chaburas, and that was kind of one pillar.
And with that background in yeshiva is very, very nice, but I'm sure life got very, very busy. You had a family, you had a career. So what allowed you to continue that beyond the confines of the Beis Medrash?
You are 100% right. It is very difficult to juggle things once you leave yeshiva. It's a lot easier to maintain this enthusiasm and this output when you're in yeshiva without anything else distracting you. So looking back, I think there was perhaps one person that stands out as the motivator, as the person who motivated me to do this. And interestingly enough, I never met this person, and that is a person by the name of Dr. David Applebaum, Zichron Livracha. Dr. Applebaum, who was killed in a terrorist attack with his daughter Nava in Cafe Hillel the night before Nava's wedding. It was quite a well-known tragedy at the time. He was my wife's teacher in seminary. He was a mentor of my wife's. And when we first got married, which was shortly after he was killed, I learned about Dr. Applebaum. And one of the things that I learned about Dr. Applebaum, which really made an impression on me, is that he was, in addition to all of his incredibly busy, entrepreneurial, successful, impressive things that he was doing outside of the Beis Medrash, he focused and put a tremendous personal emphasis and value on creative output. He was a writer. He wrote Chidushei Torah. He published Chidushei Torah, and this was something that was very special to him at every simcha and otherwise. And I guess for me, it made an impression on me because it gave me the validity and the license to go from being what I would call a passive consumer of Torah in yeshiva, where you're just kind of listening to what everybody says, and that's very important and necessary, to be able to complement that with this perspective of being an active contributor, an active creator. I don't have to just be a passive consumer. I can also be a contributor and creator in the Torah world. I have chidushim. I have what to say. I can create initiatives. I can do. And I think that really motivated me. And since then, since hearing those stories, my wife and I, one of the things we do, we took upon ourselves, and she encourages me and facilitates. I do the actual learning and the writing. We publish seforim for every one of our simchas, bli ayin hara, and we've had lots of opportunities to do that for children when they're born and for bar and bat mitzvahs. And that really has allowed me to continue to be consistent, even when I wasn't always in the mood, even when things were tough. I'd say that was like really one of the ways that I kind of forced myself to keep things consistent over the years.
And that particular beautiful minhag of putting out seforim for simchas, that's also something that Rabbi Dr. Applebaum did?
Yes, he did, and in fact, he since then it's pretty incredible. I heard the idea at a it was a azkara, I think it was one of these. I went to an azkara shortly after he was killed, and one of the family members was describing this, and I never knew for years, almost for more than a decade, I had no clue who this family member was. I remember the speech, I remember how much it motivated me. I had no idea who this person was. Anyway, make a long story short, a good friend of mine, or a mutual friend of mine, between me and this person, said, this is Yisrael Spiro. This is Dr. Applebaum's nephew, who himself is an incredible, Bahlabus and an accomplished. He's a rabbi. He's a lawyer. He's so incredible. And so after what must have been, I guess, probably 18 years, I finally connected with Yisrael. It was a very emotional, exciting conversation. I told him what I was doing. I went to his office and dropped off all my seforim. He sent me some of the stuff that Dr. Applebaum had written for his, bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, and it was something very, very special. And I'll even say that other people who have seen what I'm doing have been inspired, not because of me, but because I'm just perpetuating what Dr. Applebaum did in his own family, and they have themselves asked me for help to try to do this in their own families, and so that's been very gratifying and very, very nice to see.
And so that story of Dr. Applebaum gives a sense of what motivates you and what drives you and what gives you the mindset. But practically, can you tell us a little bit about how your creative process works in putting together these seforim?
It's a great question. I wish I could give you like a polished, fancy creator answer that I have my writing schedule and my process and my, schedule. It's not always so clean. It's not always so perfect. But if I had to summarize it, I think that for me, the most important part of my creative process in this regard is that I don't look at these things as me writing something. I kind of look at myself as a writer. And I'll explain what I mean. I mean that, I don't really, it's not like I choose a topic and say, okay, now I'm going to write a sefer on Chumash. So let me now write, on every parsha. Instead, what I do is I am constantly, attaching writing, the act of writing, to any creative pursuit that I have. So if let's say on a Shabbos, if I give a chabura, or if I speak to somebody about a Rashi and I have an idea, immediately after Shabbos, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to put it in my notes. And, it's like another building block to put into the collection. And I think over time, if you kind of maintain this mindset of like just constantly recording and writing and cataloging things that you think and things that you come up with and things that you hear, what you end up with is kind of a natural trend towards different topics and different collections of divrei Torah, of ideas. And that lends itself then to be able to then look back and say, hey, that's beautiful. I have a really nice collection of divrei Torah on the Moadim. Oh, I really have a nice collection of divrei Torah on the Parsha. Hey, I really have, whatever it is. And then from there, you can then at some point start taking the next step and bringing those things to fruition in seforim. In terms of the actual, process and timing, again, I wish I could tell you I have a schedule. My wife jokes sometimes that I write my seforim between 9 and 5. And she does not mean 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. But so she's been incredibly supportive, and it is a large investment of time. But the main thing I could say is just to develop the identity of someone who is creative, of somebody who can create and does write and does produce. And then the rest kind of, in a sense, takes care of itself.
And I am curious, on a very practical level, everyone has their own setup that works for them. But as far as when you want to put out a sefer, you have a sefer coming up, do you prefer to use physical notebooks, laptop? Do you prefer to go to a base medrash or sit in your office?
It's a great question. All of the above. When I first started out, I was writing by hand. I don't even think I owned a laptop at the very beginning when I was in yeshiva. I remember going home on weekends. My mother had a laptop from work that had like the Hebrew stickers on the keyboard. My parents had made Aliyah, so they lived in Israel. I would go home and I would, with one finger each, I would literally search for the letter and tap, and I taught myself to touch type by writing my first few articles, and I would save those in Microsoft Word. At this point, I would say that my shorthand notes are either, it's kind of scattered between voice notes on WhatsApp, or just voice noting myself an idea that I don't forget, or a screenshot, or a scribble in a notebook. Those are kind of like the notes, and I have everything now more professionally, digitally in shared documents and Word documents. I do actually enjoy the full creative process, so I am involved in the typesetting and the design of the cover and things like that. So I do enjoy that kind of thing also. But at this point, I think most of it is happening on a computer properly and like in a way that would look like a normal author, a normal writer would.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what you might want to tell someone who's listening and what some of their reactions might be to some of the things that you said. So the first thing that I want to point out is that you mentioned how you had this very natural ability from a very young age to express yourself through writing. And so if someone's listening to this and they don't have that inherent talent, they don't think that they're a natural writer, what would you tell them as far as developing their creative output?
So I would answer you in a couple of ways. I think that my first thought is to push back a little bit on your premise. You say that some people might think that they're not natural writers, or that they don't have the talent for it, or they can't do it. I think that assumption is one of the limiting beliefs that I am very determined to try to break on a wider scale, both for myself and also for others around me. I think that people don't realize how capable they are of developing ideas and expressing ideas and producing ideas. With writing specifically, even if you're not planning to be a published author, I think that we see indications in Chazal and in the poskim that writing is an important part of the creative process in Torah. I mean, there's a couple of well-known marmakomos off the top of my head. Chazal darshan, kisvu lachem es hashir azos, the writing a sefer Torah, and the importance of perhaps people extend that to writing seforim as well. I think Rav Moshe and Igros Moshe was a big proponent of developing ideas in writing. I think he said it was even a kiyum of one's ability to be Malamed Torah, of Talmud Torah, that you're teaching other people through your writing, even if you're not a Rosh Hashiva. There's a Gemara in Baba Basra that talks about Ashrei Misha Balakan, Talmud biyado. He has stuff in the Marsha, and even in the poskim, there's a Taz, a well-known Taz that talks about the heter to write divrei Torah on Chol Hamoed. If you have an idea, chiddush, that you're allowed to write it down on Chol Hamoed because of, it's important to perpetuate, but also if you don't write it down, then you're going to have to spend the time, even if you remember it, you're going to have to spend the time after Chol Hamoed to write it down. So there's almost like an underlying assumption in the Taz that you're going to be writing it down and developing the idea. That's part of Talmud Torah. Better to do it now on the spot than to have to take up time later. So it's almost like he's telling you between the lines that, I'm assuming that you're writing your stuff down. So that's kind of point number one, is that everybody has the ability to do it. It's just like any other skill. That's a skill that you can develop. But I would even say beyond that, more generally, even if you go outside the context of writing, I think that the general idea, that I'm trying to communicate, and what I was inspired by and learned from my mentors and from people like Dr. Applebaum, is that at some point in your Torah career, and the career doesn't end. You're never going to get fired. You're going to be a Ben Torah forever. So at some point in your career, you have to transition from being just a passive consumer to being an active contributor, creator, participant. Writing is one way to do it, but there are endless other, opportunities and alternatives. Any person who has any skill, every person who's listening to this is talented in so many ways, has different leanings in terms of what they're interested in terms of what they're capable in doing. You can leverage any of those skills to give back to the Torah community, to develop ideas. You might not know what those things are right now, and it's not an overnight kind of fix, but it's something which you develop over time. You're a great example by starting this podcast and starting this community. This is something which you were drawn to with your skill set, and this is now the beginning of what hopefully will be a growing contribution from where you sit. I'll give you another example that's not writing oriented from my own experience, is that I have been lucky enough to work with organizations and Rabbanim. For example, Rav Asher Weiss, Shlita in Yerushalayim. So I have been able to leverage not just my interest in writing and Torah, but also my experience in marketing and product to be able to develop his website and launch his website, minchashasha.com, and maintain his email lists and to distribute his Torah to thousands of people. I'm wearing a sweatshirt here, and might not look like a Rosh Yeshiva, but I am effectively sending a shir, giving shir every week to tens of thousands of people. And I'm doing that because I was able, with Hashem's help, to take my interests, my kochos, the things that I can do well, and to kind of look for ways to leverage that for Harbatzas Torah, for Talmud Torah. And I think that that's a model, whether it's writing, whether it's helping other Talmidei Chachamim to celebrate what they're doing. Every person has opportunities to think about what they can do and then to leverage those things further as a Ben Torah and as a part of the Torah community.
Another reaction that I have, I'm not going to blame this on anyone else because it's something which I think about all the time, is that to publish stuff and put it out in public takes a great deal of self-confidence. And I enjoy our conversation so much because your self-confidence spills over to being confident in me, sometimes even more confidence that I have in myself. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, about how you develop that?
So I'm really encouraged by hearing that, because the secret is that I was not naturally that self-confident about it. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about breaking that stigma, this whole limiting mindset of I can't, I'm not worthy, I don't have a seat at the table. Maybe part of that for me is that it's something which I, faced myself, and with the help of my mentors and my parents and people around me and my wife and others around me who encouraged me, I was able to develop, I think that over time. So I appreciate that. I think that looking back, this might be the biggest issue facing Balabatim today, to put it. And I don't think that's an overstatement. I think that there's a pervading sense of I leave Yeshiva, I leave YU, wherever I am, and there's this sense of well, I'm just a Bahlabus, and so I'll go make a parnasa, and I'll write a check, and I'll learn daf yomi, and I'm not minimizing any of those things. When I once met Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Rav Shlomo Zalman's son-in-law. I was on a bus with him one time. It's a longer story for another time, but he was on the same bus route as me going to work for a period of time. So I used to get off the bus at his stop and walk with him for a few minutes a day just to chat with him. And I once asked him something about daf yomi, and he says to me, I wish I could keep up with Daf Yomi. I'm so inspired by the people who are able to learn a whole daf of Gemara every single day. So I'm not minimizing those things at all. On the one hand, on the other hand, there is a sense that we are limited in terms of what we can do. Oh, the chidushim. Oh, that's for the rabbis. That's for the Kol Elyon guys. That's for the Rosh Yeshiva. Me, okay, I'll go to the shir. I'll sponsor the shir. We don't give ourselves enough credit, and so what I've seen, that I am capable, like I tried to describe to you before. I think I saw myself that I was capable of doing things that I didn't expect, starting from Rav Kalman Levine and the Chaburas, to Dr. Applebaum, to publishing seforim at times in my life when I just had every excuse in the world not to. And so I definitely have had my ups and downs. I will say, though, on a practical level, in terms of trying to maintain that confidence and that momentum, I've tried to build in kind of protections for myself. So one of them are the seforim that I publish for every simcha. Thank God Hashem gives you opportunities to have smachot. You don't want that kid or that bar mitzvah to be the one that doesn't have the published sefer. That's not gonna end well. So that's certainly a great motivating factor. But even beyond that is I gravitate towards mentors who encourage me. One very special example is Rav Hershel Schechter from YU, who I've developed a beautiful relationship. I'm not a Talmud of YU, but I got to know him over the years. I spent summers together in NCSY Kollel. Every single summer, without fail, I make a point to go one evening to see people on NCSY Kollel and to go to Rav Schechter, to say Shalom Aleichem, and also to show him something that I've written. I give him something that I've written that year. And he will always, I don't know if he does this just to be nice, I hope not, but he will always warmly not only encourage me and tell me, he likes to quote to me the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah. He says, I know Bahlabatim who learn better than some of my Rosh Yeshiva friends. And the Rambam in Talmud Torah, Hilchos Talmud Torah says that Talmud Torah is for everybody. It's not just for the Rosh Yeshiva and it's not just for the rabbis. He says, Bahlabatim need to learn Torah and Bahlabatim need to be active contributors and creators. So I think that by maintaining relationships with the people who encourage me, I think that has helped me very, very much to keep encouraging myself and keep the momentum going.
I want to transition to the last part of our conversation. We say every year on Yom Kippur that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in this world at a specific time, and we're meant to be here in this specific moment. So I want to talk about our specific moment in a broader sense and then in a more particular sense. In a broader sense, we mentioned before the age of social media that we live in. Some people have defined this term called a creator's economy. So as a marketing guy, could you define that and tell us how that's relevant to our conversation?
Sure. Any person today, certainly the kids or the young people growing up, Gen Zers, I guess you'd call them, even if you're not on platforms like TikTok, Chas v'shalom, or Instagram, or some of these other platforms, it's very clear to anybody in the civilized world that you have an outlet for being creative. And you have an outlet for using that creativity to make money. And so there's this thing that we call the creator's economy where, companies are being started, platforms are being built, channels are being created of people who are creating content or stuff in their lane of interest. It could be food critics, it could be tech bloggers, it could be people just showing you what they, their cat, I don't know, whatever it is, and some other silly thing. But there's endless possibility for anybody at any age, at any economic level, to simply be a creator, produce that, get recognition, get exposure, and then even monetize that content. And I think that is important because going back to one of the points that we brought up before, when it comes to the Torah world, we are going to leave yeshiva and we're going to leave seminary or whatever it is at some point. And we're going to be faced with all of these different things that pull us in a whole bunch of different directions. Obligations, interests, the trends. And at some point, there's going to have to be a decision made. How much am I going to continue to invest in my learning and my Talmud Torah and my connection to Torah? And how much am I going to invest in these other things? It could be obligations, but it could also be creative pursuits. A person's going to get a job and develop a career and a business. Those are creative outlets that make a person feel good about themselves. And in my opinion, we don't anchor ourselves in the Torah world in some sort of creative, active output. If we don't make that transition from being passive consumers to also being active creators, then the second we have an opportunity to be a creator and leverage that creativity somewhere else, that unfortunately is going to take precedence, and that's going to pull us in the other direction. So I think that it's critically important for a Ben Torah to find ways, or a Bas Torah, for him or her to root themselves in, in this place of being a creator, being the Torah creator economy needs to be a real thing, because not only is it effective and important for you as an individual, but I think it also will help to keep you rooted and grounded in the Torah world, even when winds start blowing in other directions.
And as far as our current moment, we do find ourselves in the third month of a very, very awful war. You mentioned that one of your big inspirations was a kadosh named Rabbi Dr. Applebaum, Hashem Yikom Damo. Another one of your inspirations was also Rav Kalman Levine, Hashem Yikom Damo. And now we find ourselves in this moment. And if anyone's still listening at this point to our episode, thank you. And I will point out that the donations to Chayalim are so appreciative. I'm in touch with the unit. I'm just going to throw this out there. The morale is a huge challenge. Fighting is very intense. Losing friends is very difficult. And receiving donations and those practical things to help soldiers or displaced people are extremely important. But what about the Torah and the creation of Torah? How do you think about that in the terms of our current moment being in this war?
This has been unquestionably one of the most difficult times I think that any of us have experienced in our lifetime. It's something which we thought COVID was a challenge. This has, I think, I'm not sure who even remembers the challenges and the craziness of COVID now after October 7th. Certainly not in the Jewish community. But to your question of how it impacts, our place as a Ben Torah and our progress and the general, issues that we're discussing. So for me, the way I see it is that I think we're all waking up in the morning every day since October 7th and looking ourselves in the mirror, and we're asking ourselves either implicitly or explicitly the hard question of how am I different today than I was, before October 7th? How is my davening different? How is my learning different? How am I contributing to the Jewish people in a meaningful way? And there's not always a great answer to that question. It's not like there's an immediate answer, but I think that everybody is really inspired and motivated to just do more, be more, grow more. I think that's really the first important point, is that I think all of us have really we've gotten this kick in the pants, and like we feel this need to do something about it, which is it hurts. It really hurts. This was at such a terrible tragedy at such an awful scale, and yet we have this ability as Jews to turn that tragedy into motivation and to see, well, what can we do going forward? That's the first point. I think the second point, more specifically in the way that it's impacted, is certainly as Torah Jews, but honestly, not even as Torah Jews, the entire spectrum of Jewish people. We see something happening across the world that is just honestly unexpected and almost irrational, is that people are coming back to their Jewish identity, and they're coming out of the woodwork, as posting on Twitter that they're putting out tefillin for the first time in 20 years. They're putting Jewish stars in their profiles. They're going to rallies. And certainly in the Torah community, people are trying their best to double down and realize that what is it that we're fighting for? Is this just another war in the news? Is this just another, political dispute? The way we see it, this is really cutting to the core of who we are as Jewish people, and who we are as Jewish people and our existence and survival as Jewish people. It cannot be decoupled from our connection to the Torah. And so I think that one of the beautiful things that we have both seen, and I think also that we have the opportunity to continue individually, collectively, is to find ways to continue to make this happen, enabling ourselves and enabling other people to create content, to consume content, to be engaged with Judaism in a more creative, effective, compelling way. Make a context for this energy that has started, this momentum that's begun. Let's create a collective context for this to be able to just exponentially grow as the weeks and months and years go. We should be just doing more and more and more to produce, to grow ourselves, and then to create context for other people to grow and learn together with us. I think that's where we've already seen the trend going, and I hope we'll see that trend continue to grow. as time goes.
Thank you, Zevi. That is a really amazing finishing message, and I really hope that we continue to see that revolution of Jewish identity, of love of Torah, continue to blossom and flourish from the ashes of this terrible, terrible time. Thank you, Zevi.